Hi, this is Penn. Penn Jillette, Penn and Teller. Big guy does magic, smaller guy next to me. He does magic too. He doesn't talk that much. I want to talk about Joseph Jaffe is not famous. And Joseph Jaffe is not famous. Joseph Jaffe is wicked not famous. Joseph Jaffe is superlatively not famous, and for good and sufficient reason. I mean, maybe his guests are famous. Maybe his guests are famous. He gets some famous people on his guests, but Joseph Jaffe himself is not famous. That's the important part. You can have famous guests and still not be famous. And if you want an example of that, well, Joseph Jaffe would be a really good example. Teller would do a better job at a talk show, and Teller doesn't talk, which you'd think would be one of the major qualification of being on a talk show and not being famous. What's that, Teller? Oh, yeah. Teller says, Joseph Jaffe, not famous. Love you.
A spring in your step. There is a twinkle in your eye.
I can throw a rhyme down for you real quick. Yes, they call me Thrill. They say that I'm the man. You disagree? How could you? Let me make you understand.
Should we bring her on the show? Can anybody find me? And there she is.
Fresh as some bread. Pull right from the oven. When you feel rejected, you get some my good loving.
Take on me.
She looks wonderful. Mom looks amazing.
Somebody to. Okay, more bugger off now. I've got to show it to you.
Like that?
Joseph Jaffe, ladies and gentlemen.
You just made the new intro of the show. Yes, yep. Skibbity dip, skibbity dippity 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 dop. Yes. If you haven't seen the rather portly Turkish gentleman doing his little dance with his beautiful stomach going up and down, he's like basically a portly belly dancer, and his music is yes, skibbity dip, skibbity dippity 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 dop, yes. Now, of course, if you haven't seen it, you think that I've gone completely bonkers, which is fine, because the world that we are living in right now is particularly bonkers, and the best thing we can do is to out-bonk the bonkiness. No, wait, that just definitely did not sound right. But bear that, put that aside. We're here to talk about serious stuff today. That's why we got in we got Shorty winner. I don't know what the Shorties are, but it sounds impressive to me. We've got Mr. Jeff Barrett in the house, influencer extraordinaire, ex-influencer, reformed influencer. This is a man that influences the influencers, and we've got some pretty meaty topics to have to get through. So Jeff will be on the show in the next, 6 or 7 minutes, and I'm excited to have a conversation with him about the psychology of attention, the Matthew effect. What else are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about the end of user acquisition, the end of the user acquisition era in the internet, and more importantly, what the hell is next? I know I have my ideas, but I want to hear what he has to say. So sit back, relax, Luther, relax. And listen, I just got back from London, and so I'm a little jet lagged, which is why, relax and reflex all sound the same. But I'm happy to be back. And, this is one of our final live shows before we move to a new format in 2023, where community will be able to attend as a virtual studio audience. So there will be a live studio audience, but they will very much be virtual. They will be able to comment. They will be able to potentially come on and make cameos, get backstage passes. This is a reinvention of the talk show in the creator economy in the streaming era. One of the things that we absolutely are going to be doing, which I'm very, very excited about, is the fact that not every, but some of our interviews, I'll go ahead and do I'll go ahead and do summaries and actually get articles written up. In fact, on Thursday, we have Tom Peters. This is an amazing conversation that was pre-recorded, Tom and myself. That will be on Thursday, December 1st, which, of course, if you're watching this now and it's 2023, you're like, I don't even know what he's talking about. But I'm actually using my newsletter and using my LinkedIn newsletter to be able to share some of the highlights of this interview, and hopefully to get people to kind of see and tune in and stream in and watch what to me is one of the best interviews that I've had on the show. That is, of course, until Jeff Barrett came on the show. So I'm looking forward to that. And, Jeff and I were actually talking in the green room. And, I would describe the show as the Daily Show for Business meets Wayne's World. And today I feel like I actually am on Wayne's World. We have maybe 17,000 leaf blowers outside. And if you can't hear it, I sure as hell can hear it. And, I said to Jeff, what are we going to do about it? And he said, Joe, this is the new reality. This is the reality of life today, where leaf blowers and babies crying and dogs barking and FedEx packages arriving. This is this work from home, this hybrid reality. And maybe there's something more interesting behind it, which is specifically this idea that we are taking off our masks. We are taking off all of our disguises. We just are who we are. And if you think about it, what has advertising always done? Advertising has always attempted to put lipstick on a pig. And I've had the privilege of teaching strategic communications at NYU now for the last year, and also trying to figure out what is the new role for PR? What is the new role for strategic communications, internal and external, issues management, crisis communication? What does that look like in this new virtual hybrid, great reset, great resignation, great pause? Well, all of this will be revealed soon enough. But now it's time for the seated soliloquy. And today's seated soliloquy actually comes from the Collective Cafe, which for those of you that have that tune in, or is it tune in? I don't even think it is tuning in. But every single morning, weekday, Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a virtual coffee in Alpha Collective's Discord server in the Collective Cafe. Thought leadership, debate, manifestation, no agenda Fridays. We do live reads of books as well. I invite you to join us every Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is free. It always will be free. And today in the Collective Cafe, I discussed this concept. It's called, Why Wouldn't You? So I just came back from London, as I was saying, and I flew back on American Airlines and tried to get an upgrade using my Anytime EVIP certificate, but it turns out that the EVIP certificate cannot be used anytime because it cannot be used when, in fact, you've booked a ticket with miles, even though I earned that EVIP fair and square, even though there were 30 out of 40 seats that were completely empty in business class, even though I have the miles which don't roll over from year to year, even if I end up flying 200,000 miles in 1 year when I only need 120,000. But then the next year, let's say I fly 20,000. I don't know, maybe because I had open heart surgery, which I did have in 2021. You would think that I would be able to draw on that excess mileage, but you would be wrong. So my message to people, my message to companies, and companies at the end of the day is just a combination, a collection of people, is why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you, if you have the seat, put a bum in that seat? Not just a bum in the seat, but a bum that belongs to an executive platinum, one of your most loyal customers who has been executive platinum for 16 years, give or take. That's 16 consecutive years of 100,000 miles or more. Here's the thing. We always say that getting to no is easy. And it is. Getting to yes is hard. Getting to yes is hard. I want us to flip that on its head. I want you to have to justify to me why you wouldn't do it. It should be easy to be able to lean into your customer. It should be easy to be able to lean in to your employees. It should be easy to get to yes. Not hard, not tough. So why wouldn't you the next time you are faced with an opportunity to try something new, to surprise, to delight, to be able to break through, the onus is not on you to have to prove why you would. The onus is on you to now prove why you wouldn't, because you should. You would, you must, you will. That, my friends, is how we move forward. And now it's time to move forward with my guest, Jeff Barrett. Jeff Barrett is a Shorty Award-winning content creator and a go-to communications consultant for Fortune 500 companies, building a model that simplifies the entire process for brands. He traveled to over 50 cities, writing about startup ecosystems for Inc. and Entrepreneur. And I guess the question is, which city was the best and which was the worst? Let's ask him. Jeff, well, go.
That's always a good question, right? And thanks. I love how on the nose the seated soliloquy is with actually putting bums in seats. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but I loved it. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, thank you for putting your bum in the seat today. It is great to have you on the show. And yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the whole concept, and you know, I'm sure you've had to sell a few ideas in your time through to a client or three. And it's amazing whenever we bring something new, something untried, untested, something original, something with the potential to change the game. The first thing out of a client's mouth is always, you know, my three worst words in the world. My concern is, like, why would you start off the bat with a concern? Why not just leap into the possibilities and the ability to say yes?
Well, there's so many reasons, right? That's the agency versus brand conundrum, right? Because on the brand, you're kind of trying to play defense. You're trying to do things that are good, but that don't, you know, offend or do the wrong thing or make somebody in the internal team upset, right? And on the agency side, you're always throwing out the best and brightest ideas you have because you're not dealing with the internal politics, right? You're just simply throwing out ideas. So I think there's always that push-pull and that conundrum. Right. And then also just to make your life worse. Right. And listening to what you were talking about, I think the world in 2023 is going to get less convenient. And I think people are actually going to say no more on the brand side, not yes. I can get into that, but yeah.
Yeah. Well,
plenty of things to be excited about, too. But
no, I also want to go back to that idea of defense, right? Playing defense and always being on the back foot. It doesn't make sense, just logically, that you would you would try and build a brand and innovate and adapt and evolve, but playing defense. Defense, I guess, prevents you from losing, but defense typically is not going to help you win, and that's the bottom line.
Well, systems are flawed, right? Some are more flawed than others. But I think early on in my career, I kind of started to understand it from the brand side, right? Even if I never worked on the brand side, I understood where they're coming from, right? That taking risk is not rewarded as much in internal comms for a company. Risk takers tend to not get rewarded. The people that push things, incrementally forward tend to get rewarded, right? And so if we understand that structure, flawed as it is, then we can start to pitch our ideas that way, instead of begrudging it. I don't begrudge it. I know it exists. I know it's there. So then I try and, couch my ideas and make my ideas fit within that structure as much as I can.
Right. I mean, something that I heard many, many moons ago, which is the chief marketing officer, or we may just say the corporate executive, got to where they got to not by mitigating risk. Sorry, not by managing risk, but by mitigating it.
Absolutely.
So it was just eliminating it as opposed to kind of adopting it, embracing it, internalizing it, and actually figuring out how to take that energy and turn, the uncertainty into a superpower.
And the other thing too, from an organizational psychology standpoint, is sometimes that's explicit in the organization, and sometimes that's internalized and implied, right? So there actually might be a risk tolerance, but somebody, whether they've been in their career for a long time or just seen examples, don't want to take that risk. So sometimes psychologically, we hold ourselves back from things, and this can come into consumer psychology and other things, but psychologically, we do hold ourselves back from things because we just anticipate what the answer might be.
It's so funny because, and we're going to get into I think a very, very provocative, meaty, timely topic, which I would kind of herald with respect to this idea of the Matthew effect, something actually that I was introduced to through Mark Schaefer and his book Cumulative Advantage. But before we get into the thing about this show is we span the gamut from sublime to ridiculous, and we're going to start off with a little bit of ridiculous, because here's the thing: people know that you're an influencer, a mover, a shaker, a creator, a influencer to the stars, but they really want to know who is the real Jeff Barrett. And so
I hope so.
We sent our reporters into the field, and we found out that you are a fan of Never Have I Ever on Netflix. Now, I've never heard of Never Have I Ever, but it seems like, first of all, looks like you're a star on the show, which is amazing.
It fit in nicely.
What is this? Is it like a high school musical meets iCarly? Tell me about Never Have I Ever on Netflix.
It's a high school comedy, Mindy Kaling produced. What is wonderful about that show is that John McEnroe is the narrator. And you would never, ever think of John McEnroe narrating the life of an Indian American woman. And so that, and it gets explained in the early going, but just the juxtaposition between, teenage girl issues with John McEnroe having to explain them, say no more. There's also some really good cameos. There's different voiceovers. It changes over. Look, I'm a 38-year-old man who likes a teen show, and I can't help it. It's just wonderful, and it really is applicable to a lot of people.
I mean, the only way I can respond to that is, you can't be serious. Does he do that? Oh, no.
Yes, he does.
He does.
Spoiler alert. Oh yes. They throw in all of the McEnroe tropes. They lean into making fun of the fact that McEnroe is voiceover for the entire show. But just like other shows that have used voiceover, like with Bob Saget and How I Met Your Mother, it plays central to the show.
All right. So because I had never heard of the show, the only Never Have I Ever that I had heard of was this one. And so I figured this might be a good opportunity for us to play Never Have I Ever. And
Let's do it.
I guess I think I might need some sound effects. Let's see. We could go with a rim shot, etc. So Never Have I Ever. Let's see how we score. Are you going to keep score for yourself?
I will do it mentally here. I can see all of them.
I will do my best. Never ever. Have you ever broken a bone?
I have not.
I have. So I guess you have 1 point, right?
I have 1 point. Now here's the point of this though. If I score less, does that mean I've had less life experience and therefore have done less life?
I don't know. All right, you know what? I'm gonna do some mental math here as well. I know I've broken a bone. I've skipped school.
I've skipped school. That's a for sure. Right. I have not fired a gun, so that's 2. I've not been skydiving, Rocky Mountain climbing, or rode a bull named Fu Manchu.
I'm on 1 for skydiving. Ridden in a limo. Hell, had braces.
I had braces forever.
Does Invisalign count?
Yes. They're fancy braces, Joe.
Fancy braces. On the
Let's
massage,
see.
not that I'm going to admit to. Tattoo,
Every
no tattoo.
a massage is everybody's had a massage in their life. I mean, formal or informal. Tattoo. That's four.
Thank you for the clarification. I have dyed my
Yes.
hair. I was in The King and I when I was a kid, and I dyed my hair permanently. Well, I mean, for that period of time, black.
To make it fun too, I dyed my hair purple when I was 13, and we went on a field trip to a place with wooden roller coasters, and it started raining. So as I'm on the roller coaster, there's just purple going everywhere. It was chaos. I'm at 5 right now.
Jeff, have you ever given birth?
6, ridden a horse. I have not. So that's going to be 7. I think both of us are going to hit that one.
I'm on 3. I've not
gotten it. I've gotten a ticket.
Well, maybe I've
8 scuba diving. Sushi is amazing. Eat it.
Zip lining.
I've been on a train. I've been on a train. That's the only way to get to Chicago from Michigan. I'm going zip lining. I've done that. Oh, by the way, zip lining I did in Salt Lake City, and I went down where the actual ski jump is, and I realized when you watch ski jump on TV versus when you see it in real life, it is terrifying.
Right, it looks terrifying on TV.
It's worse in person. Eating food that fell on the floor. No, that's the 5-second rule in the Midwest. You got to go for it.
10 seconds if you've ever worked in a restaurant.
Been in the ambulance. Been in an ambulance. Yes.
Met someone famous. Yes, I met Jeff Barrett. So that's
I feel like what's great about this interview is that we're equally on a non-famous plane, and I love it.
Well, I mean, decidedly not. Being on TV. I mean, hello, Joseph Jaffe is not famous. You're on TV, Jeff.
Oh yeah, well, I've been on TV. That's TV is an interesting construct of what you define as it now. Been on a cruise. You know what? I have not been on a cruise. That's 9. And I have not gotten anything pierced. That's a full 10.
So the final score is I think we might need some fanfare. Here are the results. The judges are tallying up the count. We'll go with an air horn, and the answer is Jaffe 5, Barrett 10. What does it mean?
See, you've lived more life. That's what's happening.
It means nothing. What does it mean? What do I win? I want to win a prize.
Well, on a game where 2 people are not famous, and a game that doesn't matter, that fits perfectly. I love it.
So, how did you score at home? That's what that's the question I have for people that are watching at home.
If somebody hit 0, I am super impressed. By the way,
have you met someone with 0?
No, because there's always, when they do those, there's always one little outlier. That's the thing. Nobody has enough time, right? Interesting thing when we talk about consumer psychology, right, is that nobody has enough time to consume the amount of content that's out there, to do enough things. You're always going to apply your attention one way or another. So that it's almost impossible. It's impossible to be well-rounded. In other words, you're going to go in directions.
All right. So speaking of being well-rounded, let's talk about the rounding of PR. That doesn't even make sense. But let's talk a little bit let's talk about your profession. You know, I teach strategic communications. You are a practitioner, and a fairly adept one at that. We've seen PR. You know, I'm going to take this video. I'm going to show it to my Stratcom students. I'm going to say, here's Jeff, and this is what Jeff has to say about how PR has changed. But remember, the backdrop of this, in terms of how is PR changing, how has it changed, is we witnessed, I think, a major shift with the advent and the introduction of social media, where suddenly earned media, you know, seem to be taken up by the PR, the Steve Rubels and the Edelmans, etc. And influencer marketing came into the forefront. Now we see the beginnings of Web3. So where is PR today? How is it changing, Jeff?
So there's a lot of things to unpack there, because that's a very large question. I'll get into some more nuanced answers, but I think to tie everything together that we're going to talk about today, factors on what companies are doing, right? Factors on how the internet is changing. All of these factors will, as you mentioned, with influencers, change how PR is done, right? So if the model is influencers and it's based on social media companies in that era that I'm defining, right, that 15 years from 2007 to 2022 as user acquisition, right? So if we live in a world that's defined by user acquisition, right, and there's a lot of attention and there's a free flow of social media, then influencers are going to play a large role, and they always will. But if you start to think about 2023 and beyond, and companies having to make money, then it's very logical to start seeing some channels going behind paywalls, right? Because these companies have to make money. We're heading into an era where companies like Uber and Lyft and Grubhub and Postmates and these social media companies, they have shareholders, they have to make money. You will start to see things this is what I was kind of alluding to earlier, you'll see things get less convenient because all these convenient things we had weren't actually making money for the companies, right? You'd hear about Blue Apron all the time in a podcast, but it wasn't actually making money, right? So we're going to see a little bit of a shift and change in what companies do and how they do it, which will impact, because if things start to go behind a paywall, then you'll see a shift in how influencer marketing is done. Everything has a domino effect. But to kind of get back into the overall question of how has PR changed, because you have all these different outlets, right? And you have less gatekeepers and there are influencers. What this allowed me to do in the last 15 years was, come straight out of college and navigate a different space where there were, not that there weren't less gatekeepers, but there were different ways and maneuvers around gatekeepers. And so when we were talking backstage a little bit about the premise, right, of PR is that you have contacts and you have a retainer and you go to the client and say, we think we can do this. We're not sure if we can do this. We're going to ask them nicely, or we're going to put the best pitch out there, or we're going to write something up that's going to get somebody to do something. But the end part of PR is always, you do have to have someone on the other end that is willing or able to put your message out there. So you're always a middle person in that equation. And what I started to realize with social media influencers is that every person, famous or non-famous, that has some kind of influence has some kind of leverage. And so if you start to work with enough people who have leverage, and more importantly on my own, I created a show, I did a tweet chat back when those were popular, I did podcasts, I did things to build up an audience because that gave me leverage in a space where instead of asking somebody to do something nicely, I was being able to be helpful or help advance things or have a more one-on-one and equal conversation. And I think that will always be true in PR. I think you should always, and this is kind of like directly to your students, but I think you should always be considering what your individual leverage is, because that will travel from agency to agency or to your own agency. That will never go away. And so having the ability to have leverage will allow you to do more things. That's just kind of how the world works. But this was predicated on this era of the internet allowing for more people to write, more contributors, more columnists, more people putting out content, giving you more access to where that content was. You weren't using 3 broadcast networks or 4 or 5 publications. You started having places come out like Mashable and Cheddar and places that reinvented what content looked like, and it gave you a lot of different avenues. And the more avenues you have, the more leverage you have to kind of use different things in different scenarios to get your content out there. Boy, that was a long-winded answer. Thanks for listening.
But there were 2 key parts of that of what you said, and I'll kind of work backwards. The first that I find very interesting is this concept of leverage. That's not a word that typically is used in a conversation about earned media and even influence and influencer marketing.
Pretty much never. Yeah.
and by not often, we mean. So one of the things that I remember hearing years ago was there is a huge difference between influence and popularity. And of course, fans, friends, followers. And then there's a 4th F, which is fake, being able to buy them. What you realize is popularity does not equal influence. Now you're introducing a very interesting concept, which to me is fascinating, which is leverage. And leverage can be also looked at as, there can be positive and negative, right? It could be like, hey, you owe me a favor, or, I know what you did, that informal massage when you got the tattoo and the piercing. You see how I brought it
absolutely
back there?
I love how you brought it back. I think you're absolutely right. I think
it's social capital, social currency, and you have to use that very, very carefully, especially when reputation is built on decades sometimes of trust and integrity and consistency, and can be, destroyed in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about specifically using the word leverage, and I always use it, is it has a more negative than positive connotation, right? It's usually meant to define, okay, there's that somebody has something over someone, right? But really, if we kind of strip that back, and Brene Brown and others have done good jobs of taking other words and redefining them. But I think with leverage, what that really means to me is it clearly defines the ability to have a more equal relationship in that context. And so not coming at something without having something to offer in return. And again, these are not one-on-one things. This isn't about handing something under a desk. It's more so, and you know how this world works, is that we're always going to be more helpful to the people who can be a little bit more helpful to us and who connect dots. And so, yes, true leverage behind the scenes and true influence actually is, can you help people? Can you be influential? Can you do things that help people push their career forward? And that, whether we consciously think about that or not, that does actually move the needle more than just, you have a vanity metric.
Yeah, I can see you starting an entire new practice in the field, leverage relations. Forget about public relations. You are the inventor, the grandfather, the father of leverage relations. And of course, I agree. I think when the negative implication or interpretation of leverage, in fact, is influence, right? The word is, influence over. So influence itself, by definition, is a negative. But leverage can be, the 2x4 being able to use a piece of wood to, help get that wheel out the mud. That's leverage too. And there are powerful scientific, I guess, physical and physics benefits of being able to apply leverage to a sticky or stuck situation.
Absolutely. It just gives you more options, right? So at its best, right, that's what it does. At its worst, it creates old boys networks. It creates things that don't leave room for DEI. There are obvious reasons why, the mere concept of we tend to work with people we know and people we trust and people we've delivered on for before can lead to, the wrong consequences too. But yes, in the practice of public relations, it can actually behoove you and help you to have points of leverage. And that's why, again, like if I ever, when I talk to universities, and I gave a talk at Michigan State, that was what I talked about explicitly was I wouldn't bank on the company you work for or the place you work for to give you the leverage, right? The name on the building shouldn't give you the leverage. You yourself should have the leverage, because then that will go with you. Like there's the adage in sports that defense travels, right? Well, leverage travels. That will go with you wherever you take it, and it will always be there for you. And whether that's social capital or knowing the right people or making the right introductions, or interestingly, in my early career, I did a lot of interviews when I was writing for publications, whether that was Inc. or Washington Times or other places where, instead of, I wasn't going to run into Gary Vaynerchuk or, Mark Cuban on the streets, but if I wanted to talk to them, I at least had a outlet where I could give them something so that I could have the conversation. Very, very meta in the fact that we're in two boxes right now talking inside of a talk show, that is the very inherent idea. But yeah, when you want to make introductions and you want to move ahead in your career, having something to offer isn't a bad idea.
And that is also part of the reciprocity. It's just that it might not always be equal at the time, but over time,
shouldn't be, yeah.
But over time, it does tend to balance out.
It's like red and black on a roulette wheel, right? Eventually, it equals out about 50-50. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're me and you end up with green, but
that's how they get you. That's how they get you. You think it's 50-50, but it's 48.
Until it hits the double zeros. So the other aspect of your response spoke about monetization, and I think that's a very astute insight, which is seeing that, whether it's like Substack or using NFTs or gating systems, we are starting to experiment with this idea that it isn't one, mass and mass media. And, we've always been told and taught that everything is about audience and scale, and to be big as opposed to be best. And I just find it to be very interesting because the whole media model, I mean, whether we like it or not, is I even look at it for the show. I look at it for Alpha Collective, which is how do I get mentioned by, in front of as many people as possible? How do I build my audience in front of to a large group? But I think there's a balance between clearly too small is not good, but I don't think too big is too good. And now if you're an influencer, well, how do you make money, to your point, when in actual fact, people are not really buying the most, but the most best or the best most. And there's a quality control that now I think wasn't there before, especially when people are paying for content.
Well, and there's that old adage in radio too, that you should never be down the middle, right? Down the middle doesn't sell. You should have polarity. You should be controversial. Those things always worked in radio. The same thing with messaging, that you should never be too broad as an influencer, because then you're not really tying yourself to anything. Again, all things being equal, if you can have 7 million followers, take 7 million followers, it's wonderful. But I think we are starting to, and you mentioned Substack. I think Substack is a great example of it giving proof to the fact that if you have 1,000 people that are really into your content and you're really delivering the right content, that's a really good marketing model. If you can just have 1,000 people who are really ardent supporters of what you do, then I think you've got something there. And brands are starting to see this too. And there's a next evolution in this, right? Where we're going to see stuff get even more targeted, because if things start to close off, we've got so many good automations and targeting that you will see a lot of marketers start to like hyper target where things go.
Well, I mean, you're segueing actually beautifully into, I mean, you've alluded to 1,000 true fans. But this is something that you're going to reveal what comes next. If we are approaching the end of the user acquisition era for the internet, which, by the way, if you think about it, why are brands tapping into influencers? Because they're trying to acquire more customers. And I refer to them as strangers and prostitutes. The stranger is the first-time buyer, and the prostitute is the promiscuous buyer, the switcher. So I think I have an idea of what comes next, but I want to hear what you have to say. What comes next?
And an interesting thing, I don't think this is being driven by the influencer community. This is driven by absolutely, we've tried the model of user acquisition. But by the way, there is an interesting caveat to that. I don't think every industry is done with user acquisition. If you look at card trading, there's an app called Whatnot that is absolutely at the forefront of buying and selling live. If you look at other countries outside the US, there's a lot of live buying and selling. That app does a really good job of doing that. There's still space to grow in live buying and selling. But for all of these industries that have matured, whether that's, especially things in the convenience economy or social media, these things have matured to the point where they are public. They have IPO'd. They have shareholders. They have investors. And at some point, this comes to roost and you have to turn a profit. And so if it's predicated by that, then things become behind paywalls, right? We start to get into, trial balloons of spend $8 to get a blue check, which we could unpack that for 30 minutes. I don't know if I feel like doing it. But where I see things going is I see things going into a more tangible, paywalled, less convenient space. And I think the most interesting thing about 2023 is that there are going to be things that either go behind paywalls or go away completely that people use on a daily basis that they're going to feel discomfort with. Eventually, this change will make sense and people will be fine with it. And we've seen Substack work. But I think there's going to be a lot of consumer pushback. And it was interesting when you're talking about airline miles. You'll see some consumer pushback on a lot of things seeming less convenient when we've been trending towards more and more convenience for 20 years, but now we're trending toward profit over convenience. We're trending toward profit over users. And what that means for the influencer is that it's not limitless on how many people you can acquire now. So then it's, what do you do with what you have, and how do you consolidate what you have into something more tangible and more engaged, rather than trying to acquire more people. And I think the advertisers themselves in that space will gravitate metric wise to the people who have the ability not to span the internet, but more so who can actually convert. I think conversion will be much more important than, acquisition.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what you've done, I think the nuance is it's not just about retention, it's about conversion. And it isn't just about, I mean, retention is clearly there, but there's a conversion from window shoppers to buyers, right?
Yes.
But then there is a conversion of a customer to a client to an advocate. There is a conversion in terms of them becoming raving fans. There's also a referral conversion. The word I would use, which I wrote in Flip the Funnel, is the A of Adia is activation, is being able to activate. It's almost like, what's it like Power Rangers? It's like, it's the ability to activate the superpower. And when you have the bird in the hand, as opposed to the two in the bush, what are you doing with it? What are you doing with it to get to the next level? So I like that a lot in terms of this idea of the what comes next. So from acquisition to activation, or from acquisition to conversion, is the message.
Yeah. Basically, you're talking about creating the Megazord, right? What I think is interesting is you've seen this in the DIY space, where the influencer then creates the project. They take you step through step, and in the details of, so you're already engaged with the influencer in the DIY space. They've walked you through how to do something, so you're super into the idea, because if you've traveled through that whole blog and seen how to do something, now you're interested. And now right at the bottom, they're like, and here are all the things you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever the place might be to execute the idea. So you've created convenience, you've created engagement, and you've created, activation, and it's converted. And I think what will happen a lot more of is that example, rather than us just throwing, money at how far can you broadcast that. We've gotten better and more nuanced at understanding, what works and what doesn't work with an influencer, just like we got better at understanding all kinds of models. And I would also add, consumers also tend to start to figure things out between what's an ad and what's helpful. And in that case, the example I gave you with the DIY, that's actually helpful. That really is, you've shown me how to do something, you've given me the steps, and you've told me where to buy it. Wonderful. That's convenient. As consumers, we see things work for a while and it changes. We saw the infomercial in the 80s skyrocket, right? Because you're like, oh, this person's demonstrating this thing. Oh, I get to see how it works. Oh, I like this. Okay, I need to buy it. And then over time, that became hokey and weird, right? We're going to start to see some things, promoted posts and some things start to feel hokey and weird to a generation that just doesn't want that, right? And so the next thing will be, well, can you eliminate steps for me? Can you make things convenient for me? And I'm already an ardent sporter.
So there are a bunch of, again, very natural segues into a conversation about prioritization. And but let's start off with attention. You asked the question, what is attention? Why do we seek it? What is the psychology behind it? And why does it play such an important role now in all of this? In terms of, we always used to, attention was awareness, was the first part of the traditional funnel. This idea of trying to get attention, hey, look at me, guerrilla marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Earned media at its core is about being able to get attention and then hopefully keep attention. Where does attention fit into this new model? Where, we've discussed convenience, we've discussed monetization, we've discussed leverage. Where does now attention fit into this unfolding, ecosystem, if you will?
Yeah, I always want to start with like the pessimistic things that I throw out there and then get to the optimism, right? Because I think there's a lot of things to be optimistic. I just think this is a natural evolution of companies changing, right? This is just life cycle of companies, but we're seeing it with new kinds of companies. We run into roadblocks. Just, even me mentally right now, I'm running into the roadblock of we're going to see a really tough experience in 2023 about convenience, but we're also going to see a tough thing about attention, because the dopamine rush that everyone is seeking, right? When you saw that one day where everybody thought Twitter was going to go away, and the people that really need Twitter and really like the attention they get on Twitter and like the dopamine rush, and definitely I'm somebody who has had to work very hard at trying to unwind the process of constantly seeking attention, because that becomes all consuming. So I think the two things that we have to worry about in 2023 are things will be less convenient. And I think people will, when they lose some sources of where they get attention, or those sources change or they evolve or things become different, right? We'll evolve eventually. We'll figure out how to do that. But right now, we've been conditioned to this free internet, to this user acquisition model where just throw everything out there. It's a free flowing place. And so I think we have to kind of worry about, just mentally with a lot of people, including myself, honestly, is just what do you do when that, that craved dopamine isn't there? But to answer your question more on what is attention, well, that's a variety of things, right? I think we always probably define it in PR as what the brand is trying to get, what the brand is trying to achieve, what they're trying to shine a light on, what they're trying to point out, what they're trying to do with positioning. I just like to also think about attention from the consumer side, because I think because this is such a one-on-one relationship with social selling and social media, you have to start to think about, it's not just the brand that's seeking attention, it's the individual. And I want to see how that unpacks. Like if we lost Twitter, there's a lot of people that is their day-to-day go-to place to sound off, to gain attention. And we all adapt. Like I've adapted from Friendster to MySpace to losing Vine to, going to Instagram to going to Twitter and platform and using Snapchat and, casually viewing TikTok, even though I'm not on it. People adapt, especially in an influencer community, but I'm more concerned about the general, individual consumer.
I agree with you, and I actually don't. I think people's heads would basically explode if Twitter went away, because there actually isn't a thing. There isn't a thing to be able to but there's a almost a nuance or an esoteric truth, which is I can go and tweet something into existence right now. And in many respects, it doesn't matter who likes the tweet, who retweets the tweet, who comments on the tweet. It's a release. It's the fact that, okay, I just got it off my mind or off my chest, and it's out there, and and I feel better. It's cathartic in many respects. And I don't know what I would do. Like, would I have to put out a newsletter? Would I have to, would I have to like create an Instagram story? I might have to go back to Facebook and update my status. So it's you
find a Mastodon server. That's the other thing too, is there's just a negative transfer in the experience, right? You see, even in people thinking they need to jump Twitter to Mastodon or Post or any of the other options, right? There's a negative transfer in, oh, well, I'm not used to this part, or I'm not used to that part. We've been so conditioned. It's just the repetition of Twitter, right? Or the repetition of any social media that you use, you'll adapt eventually, but there's a road bump. And yes, not just the people who are more bent on the influencer side, but yes, on the catharsis side of attention. Yes, without outlets, that's the one thing I worry about just from a consumer standpoint, is without outlets, without certain places to sound off when they'd like to. We've gotten so used to that. When you start to unwind and you start to pull away things, and you can also get into, if you started to take rideshare away because rideshare isn't making money, right? Or if you took certain streaming services away because they're not making money, or you take content away, all these things that we're kind of used to, right? If you took delivery food service away. This is going to impact us. And I think over 2023, that's going to be the bump in the road adjustment. 2024, 2025 is when we start to settle into, okay, what is the new normal? And you'll see people do it very well in how they navigate that, just like you've seen the Substack community or other communities in Discord do it very well right now, or Twitch. People adapt, but I think 2023 and 2024 are going to be bumpy in that regard.
It's going to be bumpy, but one of the things that certainly is going to add to the bumps, and sometimes they say things have to get worse before they get better. And I guess you could look at the final topic that we're going to discuss today, glass half full or half empty. It depends on who you are, whether you are, and even if you are a big company, if you're Patagonia, you look at it very differently to another company. There's a book that I think you've been you've been aware of, and that and certainly you've brought to my attention. It's called Winners Take All: The Elite Charade of Changing the World. It immediately made me think of the Matthew effect, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And so the backdrop of this is, it's weird. I've never quoted any form of scripture. Maybe I have, regardless of religion. But this actually, I mean, the Matthew effect comes from Matthew. And the quote is, for whoever hath, to him shall be given. It's like, sounds like Monty Python. Oh, myth.
They make it very complicated, yes.
And he shall have more abundance, but whomever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. But the idea of the Matthew effect, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, the inequality, there's something else going on here specifically with respect to this book. I would, if you think about it, and let me just kind of set the scene as we kind of get into the home straight. We've started off talking about influence, earned media versus leverage. We've moved into this rethink, or this reimagining or repositioning or reclaiming of attention. And now we're talking about in one part purpose, one part meaning, one part being able to say, wait a second, who are you? What do you stand for? What do you say versus what do you do? So I would love for you to kind of give us your perspective on the final component of this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm not probably as negative as that book, because I kind of work behind the scenes and do things in DEI and CSR. So I do see things that are actually working. What I would say is that book does unpack the discrepancies of narrative versus actual things happening. And what I would say, to put it in a nice, tidy package, is that the evolution of purpose or corporate social responsibility is that it went from writing a check to having kind of a purpose-driven system, right? And so we kind of exist right now in a place where we have purpose, we have action, we have companies, taking steps. I would say that it needs to evolve one step further, and that it has to be that the purpose has to be inside the product. The actual product itself has to be driving that purpose. It can't just be that, because I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and I've spent a lot of time in a lot of circles where the messaging always had to be, we are changing the world, right? This user acquisition era of, we are disrupting, we are transforming, we are changing the world. I think we're settling into a place where not every bit of messaging is going to be about changing the world, right? It's going to be about incremental steps. But I think messaging always has to tie in with where we are heading in a corporate culture. And so if we are going from this lofty user acquisition era to something that's more concrete and more substantial and has to show profit, then the messaging has to align with that. And the messaging can't be flawed or not flawed messaging around purpose, but it actually has to be that product is actually delivering something. And then that product has to be doing some kind of social good with that product. Now, look, every product can't functionally do that. Like literally Tide cannot change the world, right? Tide can do one thing and do it very well. But keeping in mind from a messaging standpoint, getting closer to that purpose being built in the product, I think is vitally important. And I think what we kind of dealt with is we had almost a sugar rush era of everything was going well, everything was lofty, everything was about changing the world, and reality is setting in. And so I hope that companies also get much more honest with and transparent about what they're doing. And hey, maybe we don't go out there and say that we're going to change the world, but maybe we say we're going to make an incremental step here, importantly, to, bridge pay equity or wealth equity or a variety of things. Like, we're going to do something here and now that is tangible. And I think that's where we need to head.
I want to just make sure that I understand or can frame or reframe what you're talking about, because I really like this idea of purpose has to be inside the product, the JC Penney, it's all inside. I think on one level, what I hear you saying is, instead of talking about it, actually, instead of making the promise or creating the intent, follow up, follow through. But the other idea of inside the product, it's not necessarily the product is sustainable, the product is this, 10 cents out of every dollar goes towards this charity or this cause. I think what you're really saying is the product is the service, is the financing, is, employee relations. The product is everything, and everything has to live inside in order to move, beyond this idea of doing what seems right at the time, paying lip service, leaning in when the world is looking, and when the world is no longer looking, go back to your old bad habits. I'll just give you one quick example, which just, really speaks to me. I was giving a keynote to a bunch of marketers, and they said, so we've created like an amnesty with respect to late payments and interest rate spikes. And we're giving people this period of time now where, because of COVID, they said, but when should we return to the old way? When should we return to, again, late fees and penalties? And my answer was never. Why would you want to punish your customer as opposed to figuring out how to help them and work with them? Never. And so, for me, it has to be not just moving from talk to walk, not just in terms of CSR checking the box, to something that is truly holistic, integrated, all encompassing, but it also has to be a permanent commitment as opposed to a temporary campaign.
Well, and also maybe it's cynically, but I'm saying because of putting it into the product, it will actually get done. Because again, if we're going into an era, right, where you had the Great Resignation and now you have this great kind of contraction of jobs, right? Or, a contraction of economy where things are tightening, right? Budgets are tightening slightly, not that much, but budgets are tightening slightly. Companies are getting a little bit more closed off. They're taking a little less risk going into 2023. If this is tied to the actual business goal, this will actually happen. And so I think of it in the terms of, like, if you're a finance company, right, instead of saying, we've created a scholarship, if you have the ability to make sure that underserved people have a better access to a loan so that you can handle and tackle generational wealth, then not only, obviously you're a for-profit company that has to serve you, I get that. But if you can do both things at once, where you are building business, but you are also driving an outcome, I think that's where things get done. I think and worry that the things that were more pie in the sky and more lofty get lost. Those CSR initiatives get lost in 2023 and 2024 because companies will be tightening and focusing more on profit. And so I kind of optimistically hope that we get things closer to the profit center so that the purpose and the good work actually does happen.
Get it done is the message. And so we have a second quote today, and this quote does not come from scripture or Matthew. It comes from me. I wrote today, the man who asks for nothing is the man who has everything. Jeff, you are the man who asks for nothing, because when I asked you what you wanted to promote, you said, how ironic is this that based on what I do for a living, there is actually nothing that I need or that I want to ask for at the moment. Nothing that you need to promote. Well, guess what? By saying that, you have promoted yourself in the best possible way. You have gotten my attention. You have demonstrated your ability to give. You've applied the leverage, and you've demonstrated the future of PR, all in 1 hour or less. How about that?
You know, it's accidental and not. I'm a completely actualized human being. Like I've gotten to where I've gotten to, and I feel comfortable. But yeah, there is an irony in being a PR person that doesn't have something at the ready to promote, but it's also not the right time or the right channel. I'm a very big proponent of there's a time and a place for everything, and this isn't the time to plug my client work or to plug anything specific. I always think that just inherently having a conversation is plugging what you're doing, what you're about. And so I like to talk about things that are outside of my purview, because I think that's where you understand what someone is thinking about, what someone is about. And that was a fun conversation. Sorry, I beat you at Never Have I Ever. Or did I? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. You won it. You won and you lost. If you'd like to follow Jeff on Instagram at Jeff Barrett, and on the Twitter, Barrett Tall. Barrett tells all. I don't know, something like that.
You actually got it. A lot of people didn't. I couldn't get Jeff Barrett on Twitter in like 2009, so I had to go with Barrett all. And led to some fun jokes.
Well, you certainly bore it all. You did not birth a child, as we know. No. And I'll tell you, someone else who didn't birth a child is Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
And we will be back soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.